Hello people of YouTube, it's Deepak here, and welcome to DCS World 2.9.11 and Eagle Dynamics AH-64D Apache module. Welcome to Tutorial 2, Taxi and Takeoff. Today we're going to cover the basics of handling the aircraft on the ground, and also the basics of handling the aircraft in the air, which are the two places you're most likely to handle the aircraft. So today we're going to cover the basics of the Symbology modes that you can enter from the pilot's view. We won't cover anything with regards to sensors, queuing and weapons employment, but we'll cover the basic Symbology modes that you've got. We'll also cover the hold and trimmer hat, which you'll probably make use of, and also the tail wheel lock push button, which you have on your cyclic. So very quickly, let's take a little look at the controls that we're going to make use of today and make sure that we have all of those mapped. Let me go into the correct category here. Here we go. So first things first, you're going to have this thing that's labeled the Force Trim Hold Mode switch. It has a forwards, an aft, a left and a right. Left is to flip between different attitude modes. Right is different altitude modes. Down disengages any holds, and up you push and hold to use the force trim. So that's your trimmer in effect. We then have Symbology. We have Symbology Select, and it has an up, a down, and a depress. You want to make sure that you have that set up as well. And then you'll see here I've got tail wheel lock unlock button as well. This is on the cyclic, and that's a pretty important thing to have. Also, I've mapped a button. You don't need to unless you want to, but I've mapped the button to bring up and hide the AH-64D, the actual eyepiece that you use as your primary flight instrument. So let's come back out of here, and before we proceed any further, let's cover the Symbology modes so you know what we're looking at before we get started. So if I bring up my AH-64D, the aircraft is fully aligned and started up. I'm going to bring my eye line up to this reference here. Now actually, before I do anything else, I'll tell you what these things are. Here we have two symbols actually overlaid. The dashed cross is actually your queuing symbol, and the current queuing is indicated at the bottom right here, and my current queuing is fixed, which means it's bore sight. So this cross will always appear at bore sight. Now we'll cover queuing in a later tutorial, but it is possible to have this symbol queued to what your CPG is looking at. It can be queued to a radar target. It can be queued to all manner of stuff. The queuing system in this helicopter is very complex and very capable. This diamond symbol is the head tracker symbol. It's really not of any particular importance during the course of this tutorial, so we'll ignore it. And then here is your actual line of sight symbol, this cross here with the circle and the dot. It also has queuing dots, and the queuing dots will always indicate which way you should go to get towards your queue symbol. So because we're using fixed mode, it's really just showing us how to get back to the front of the helicopter. Now note that all of the Symbology in this helmet-mounted display, this AH-64D, is designed to show you the point of view from the front of the helicopter. So even though I'm looking to the left, this horizon line is the helicopter's kind of bore-sighted horizon line. So it doesn't change with my head position. That's a very important thing to note when you're flying the helicopter. But yeah, this dashed line here is my horizon line. I'm going to bump the system into the cruise page and we'll get full pitch bars. So you've got standard pitch and roll bars like you would have in any aircraft. We've got our current heading along with a heading tape. Note that this heading tape is indicating 180 degrees of worth of heading pointed in the direction the helicopter is pointed, just so that you're aware. So that's good to note. Top right here in cruise page mode, that's a bit flickery, let's bring my head down for a moment. Top right here is the barometric altitude. Down here is the radar altitude. This filled triangle is the current vertical speed, and the kind of delineated areas here are positive and negative 1,000 feet. So each of these little lines here is 200 feet per second of vertical speed. That's kind of handy. You then also have a bar which will appear down the right hand side, which will show you from 0 to 200 feet off of the radar altimeter. Top left here is showing us our current torque demand. Left hand side is showing us our current airspeed in knots. Bottom left here is showing us ground speed in knots, currently selected waypoint, and distance to that waypoint. And then the very bottom left here is showing us our currently selected sensor. We've selected the pilot's helmet mounted display. And then this is the currently selected ranging. We've got it set to 1.5 kilometers. That's a weapons thing. We'll cover that in another tutorial. We have our slip ball here, and then we have the different field of view indications at the very bottom. That's not really important for the kind of flying we're going to be doing today, so I will not cover it. I'm now just going to center up the display. Now, you have a Symbology select control, as I showed you there, which can go forwards and backwards. Pushing it forwards will flip you between cruise and transition modes. We currently have cruise. If I push it forwards just now, we get transition mode. Transition mode is mostly the same as cruise, but you also get velocity and acceleration cues, which you would have in the hover mode. So yeah, pushing forward just flips between cruise and transition. For takeoff, you'd probably use transition. Once you're into stable flight, you'd probably use cruise. If I push this switch to the aft, we're first going to get hover mode. Now, it doesn't show very much right now. It takes away all the pitch and heading, pitch and horizon indications. But the circle is the acceleration cue. This shows us in the short term what the aircraft is doing, and also once we're airborne it'll show a line, and the line is the velocity vector, and that shows us our overall direction of travel. Now if I go aft again on Symbology Select, we get the bob up mode, which is basically exactly the same, except it places this octagon on a position on the ground and it will move. So we can basically record a position on the ground, and then we can figure out where we are in relation to that position. It's very, very handy for maintaining a position over the ground, especially for bobbing up, hence bob up mode. And if I push aft again, it just puts me into the hover mode. For now, I'm going to leave it in transition mode, because that's the mode we will use next. And yeah, like I was saying before when we were looking at the controls, we also have our trimmer and holds switch. Pushing it to the left gives us one of the attitude hold modes, and we can tell that we're in attitude hold mode because we have a box around our airspeed. If I push aft on the switch, we'll disengage, you get a tone and the box flashes, so that gives you an indication that it's been turned off. Now, this attitude hold has actually 3 different modes, which will engage based on our airspeed, mostly. So if I push it on just now, you'll see that it says attitude hold. If I push aft, it turns off. So you can always see which mode you're in by looking at the EUFD. So if we're at less than 5 knots, pushing left on the hold switch will actually put us into a position hold. Basically, the helicopter will maintain a position on over the ground. If we're between 5 and 40 knots airspeed, it will give us the velocity hold. So it will maintain current heading and speed. If we are above 40 knots, it will give us an attitude hold. In the attitude hold mode, if we're wings level, less than 3 degrees roll, it will maintain current level of pitch, and it will keep us rolled level. If we're in a turn, so more than 3 degrees roll, it will maintain the turn, and that's kind of handy. So position hold, velocity hold, and attitude hold, all accessed by pushing the hold switch to the left. Now if we push the hold switch to the right, that puts us into an altitude hold, and we can tell because we get like a boxed arrow around the current vertical velocity indicator. And down here it says radar altitude hold. Now if you're at less than 1,428 feet and less than 40 knots, you'll get the radar altitude hold. If you're above that altitude or above that speed, you'll get the barometric altitude hold. And again, pushing aft disengages that hold mode. And then pushing forward on the trimmer hold switch is simply the force trim. So if you're trying to trim the aircraft, you push forward and hold it, do your maneuver, and then release. When you're happy with the current position, the aircraft will then trim. It will also actually try to maintain the heading that you're on in that mode as well by default. Okay, so that was a lot of information about symbology modes and holds. Let's move on to actually taxiing the helicopter, which is actually quite easy in the Apache because it does have wheels. You're not having to hover taxi in this particular helicopter. One complication, however, is that you have a locking tail wheel. And this is something you can control from the cyclic. You've got a push button, as I showed you earlier. And if we look at the EUFD down here, you can see that currently it shows me the status of the tail wheel lock selected. Now if I tap the tail wheel lock button, you'll see that I now have unlock, and in this position the tail wheel will remain unlocked until I actually start moving forwards again. So what will happen if I actually increase my torque to about 28%, about there, and if I move my cyclic forwards, oh actually I know what the problem is. I have the parking brake on. First thing to do, tap your toe brakes and you'll see parking brake disengages. And if I now push my cyclic forwards, we will start to taxi. And using my yaw pedals, I can actually very easily steer the aircraft back and forth with the tail wheel unlocked. However, note the thing that it's actually quite difficult to do with the tail wheel unlocked is to actually taxi in a straight line. What I now need to do is to tap my tail wheel unlock button again. You'll see I now have lock selected, and after a short delay, after a little bit of travel, the tail wheel will move to the rear and actually lock rear. So, if I have it unlocked and I do a turn, I then need to tap the button to lock it. Notice it's still not locked. It's still in the unlocked position. I can still turn freely. I need to move a short distance forwards, and again, kind of like a shopping trolley, once that free castering wheel has actually moved to the aft, it is now locked again. Now I can always see the status of the tail wheel by looking down at the bottom left at the tail wheel push button. You'll see that it's currently not illuminated. If I tap the button, I now get unlock, and I can turn the helicopter. If I start moving it forwards and tap the button again, you'll see that once I actually start going straight, that's when it actually goes to the locked position again. So that's really the only complication you have here. You need to increase the collective just a little bit, somewhere between like 25 and 30%. You need to just push the cyclic forwards with the parking brake off. If you want to execute a turn, tap the tail wheel lock button, push some yaw pedal in the direction you want to go, give it a little bit of cyclic in that direction as well, otherwise you might tip the helicopter. And then tap the button again for the tail wheel lock, move forwards, and after a short distance forwards, it will be locked. And then when you want to come to a stop, drop the collective all the way back down to 0 again, and you can use the wheel brakes, the toe brakes, to bring your helicopter to a stop, and then you can actually engage the parking brake if you would like. So, nice and simple. We've got some warnings there. SAS saturation. Okay. So yeah, the helicopter was fighting me a little bit there. Let's reset that just now. And let's go ahead and get the aircraft into the air. So, yes, for takeoff, we want to make sure that the tail wheel is locked, otherwise we might have a very difficult time. We also want to make sure that the aircraft is safe. So the master arm needs to be safe, ground override needs to be off. And in that position, we're pretty much good to go. I'm going to arm the Symbology system, but I'm going to put it in bypass so it doesn't fire off any chaff or flares automatically. I'm going to put the audio into the Symbology mode, and I'm going to arm it. And that's us basically ready to go. You only need to do that for like combat missions, but nonetheless. So for takeoff, I'm going to go and leave the aircraft in transition mode. I'm going to disengage the parking brake by tapping my toe brakes. I'm going to bring the cyclic up a little bit and start the helicopter moving forwards by pushing the cyclic forwards. And then I'm going to smoothly increase the collective, until I get airborne. Okay, I'm going to very quickly pause there so you can see what has just happened. Now, perhaps not the most finessed takeoff in the world, but nonetheless, we're here. So currently at 85% torque, I've got my acceleration cue showing that we are accelerating forwards. The current velocity vector shows that we are traveling forwards with a little bit of a slip to the right. I've got slip ball indication to the left, so I should really give it some left pedal. We're at 30 feet on the radar altimeter. We're climbing at a little bit more than 1,000 feet per minute, and current altitude bar is coming up. Remember, this scale is 200 feet. 34 knots airspeed currently, and 34 knots ground speed at the bottom left. So that's everything we can see here, and a heading of 343. Let's come out of pause again, and let's see if I can get this under control a little bit. I should, of course, be pushing my trim hat forwards for the force trim. Let's try and set up some kind of reasonable level of trim. Yeah, I'll have it about there, and release. And that engages the heading select, and it also trims the aircraft out. I'm still responsible for the yaw pedals at this stage though, but I'm going to kind of leave it as it is. And you can still do little inputs on the cyclic, but you'll find that once you've trimmed it, you don't need to give it that much cyclic. You'll also note that now I'm in forward flight, I do have a flight path marker. If I was to push forwards again and get myself into the cruise page mode, I would also then declutter and get rid of the velocity vector and the acceleration cue. So I'm going to bring down the collective a little bit. We're starting to get quite high. I don't want to fly too high today. And that's looking pretty good. So that's us in cruise. If I tap Symbology forward again, I'm now in transition mode. This is very good for, well, as the name might suggest, transitioning between referencing the ground and just cruising. Also, you'll note that I have a new symbol just appeared on the display here. That's my fly to Q. You see that kind of, I don't know how to describe it exactly, it's a kind of pyramid style thing with a dot in the middle. That's for waypoint 4, that's for the currently selected fly to. If I was to pop the aircraft into active pause, I could bring up the TSD, and I could bring up the route, and I could choose any of these waypoints as my direct to. So if I hit direct on the left hand side and choose waypoint 2, I'm now telling the aircraft that I want to reference waypoint 2. And you can see now that's not in front of me. However, if I turn my head around, yes, there we go, I can see it here. That's the good thing about the head-mounted display. Certain symbology is actually referenced to my head position, so these fly-to symbols are referenced to my head position. The flight instruments, however, are not. They're static. So if I wanted to come around to waypoint 2, let's come out of active pause, I could just give it a bit of cyclic, give it a bit of yaw pedal, and around we come. And you don't want to throw the helicopter around too much, because, of course, although this helicopter has a lot of stability augmentation, it is still possible to get it into VRS and other kind of funny states. So here we are, we're now flying towards waypoint 2. So, nice and simple. Anyway, let's get the helicopter down and closer to the ground again, and I will then demonstrate the hover modes and some of the hold modes. So let's bring the nose up, let's bring the collective down, and we'll get ourselves low and slow. And again, this is probably best done in the transition mode, because then you have your horizon line to reference your pitch and roll, but you also get the hover style symbology as well, like your velocity vector and the acceleration cue. There we go, we've got our altitude bar, we're below 200 feet. And at this point, I'm going to bring the speed down even more. I'm going to push aft on Symbology Select, and I now have my hover display. And let's kind of cheat this a little bit. Let's use the position hold mode. So if I get everything kind of stable, I need to get less than 5 knots. Okay. I pushed left. Oh, that's attitude hold. I really want to get the position hold mode. Let's get it back under control here. See if I can get into something approximating a hover on my own. I pushed the trim there, and of course it immediately enters the heading hold when I do that, which is making things a little bit difficult. I'm now flying backwards, I'm now descending. Yeah, you want quite smooth movements here. And that little circle, the acceleration cue, is actually very handy for figuring out kind of what you're going to trend towards. Yeah, I'm unfortunately completely failing to get myself into the position hold. Let's try and get that velocity vector line as small as possible. Yeah, I'm still just getting attitude hold no matter what I do. Oh well. Maybe I need to be a bit lower. Let's try that. Might be easier to hover that way. Nope, still just an attitude hold. Okay, nonetheless, we'll forget about that, demonstrating that right now. For some reason I cannot get it to engage. But we currently have the hover mode on the display, and if I push aft again, we'll go into the bob up mode, and the system will immediately drop a bob up symbol. You can see that octagon at the bottom of the display right now, and you can see that I've actually moved kind of quite far away from it. If I push aft twice on the Symbology select, I'll get a new one, and it kind of updates that position. But sadly, I'm really not very good at doing this. So anyway, let's get out of this situation. I'm going to push Symbology select forwards once. I'm now in the transition mode. Let's get the helicopter back into forward flight here, and then we will see what these modes look like when you're in the cruise as well. So we're now more than 40 knots. So I'm going to press the hold mode left, and you'll see that we now have the attitude hold mode. And I'm additionally going to try and put it into an altitude hold. So I'm going to adjust my collective until we're not really climbing. I'm going to push right, and you'll see that we're now in the barometric altitude hold mode. And we actually lost the barometric hold there. Let's get it all back under control. Or at least let's try to. And push to the right. And we're now in the altitude hold as well. So that should hold us at that attitude. So I engaged it at more than 40 knots with the wings rolled level. So it's going to basically just maintain my pitch on this heading, and it's also going to maintain this altitude. Now I can tell that it's in the attitude and the barometric altitude hold mode because we have it displaying as such on the EUFD, but also the airspeed is boxed. That tells me I'm in attitude mode, and the altitude is also, it's got like a kind of symbol here as well. I had to increase the collective there because we were running out of power as we accelerate. And SAS saturated. So the stability augmentation system has a certain percentage of authority, basically. And as you approach those authority limits, it warns you. I've now pushed aft again just to get me out of that. But it's very, very helpful to use the force trim and to get yourself into a trimmed condition first, which I actually didn't do the first time I demonstrated. So I'm holding trim just now, and I release. Now I'm going to push attitude hold, and I'll try and get it into altitude hold once I've arrested my climb, which is that. There we go. So I'm now off the pedals, off the cyclic, and the helicopter will now maintain a heading, it'll maintain this pitch, and it's going to maintain that altitude as well. So that's the different hold modes demonstrated. I'm pushing the hold mode aft again, and it's disengaged. I now have full control of the helicopter again. And then if I push Symbology select forward one more time, I again have the cruise mode. So those are all of the basics of taxiing and taking off and maneuvering the aircraft in a normal way. If I wanted, for example, just to make a manual turn to the right, I could push and hold my trim switch up and then conduct that maneuver manually. And then once I was happy with where I had the helicopter, I could then release, and it will once again engage the heading hold, and it will kind of maintain the trims that I've set. So yeah, you're generally going to want to push the trim hat forward, do your maneuver, and then release, and the helicopter should pretty much settle after a period. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed that. That was Takeoff taxi, takeoff, and some basic flight in the AH-64D Apache.